folks, and welcome to this recording. We're currently in week 6 and we're moving on to chapter 3. So, the first part of chapter 3, chapter 3 is quite an interesting chapter. We're going to work through quite a few different models. It's quite a long chapter, and all of this is about using different tools or models for strategic selection. So, we will work through the different ones. The ones we're starting off with today in this recording are the pestle analysis and the Porter's 5 forces model. As we work through the rest of this chapter, we will work through the other models. What do you have to know in this chapter, or what do you have to be able to do is these models that we are going through, you're going to have to be able to apply them to given scenarios, case studies, industries, etc. Okay, so what do we talk about? The first part of chapter 3 talks about the macro or external environment of a firm. So as you can see here, I've created this construct where the firm is part of a few other environments. So you've got your little firm, maybe your advertising agency, it may be your radio station, it may be as big as MultiChoice. With your firm then has what we call an internal environment. So these are everything from your policies, your internal strategies, and that sort of thing. That forms part of your internal environment. So your internal environment as a firm, you have some control over. So you can decide on your policies, you can decide on your strategies. If a strategy isn't working, you can decide to change it, that sort of thing. Then every firm is part of what we call the industry, also known as the market environment. So here, for example, we as Boston Media House, we form part of the private education industry. So industry or market environment. In terms of retailers, Pick n Pay forms part of the industry environment where the other competitors in the retail industry are players like Spar, they're players like Macro, Game, um, Checkers, etc. So a firm belongs to an industry, and then a firm also belongs to or in its has what we call the external environment or the macro environment of a firm. So this is the larger or wider environment over which a firm doesn't have any control. Okay, so what do we talk about in terms of the macro environment? It is outside the control of the firm. For today, we are focusing on this yellow area for now rather, and then we're going to focus on the green one next. And then in a subsequent lecture, we will focus on the internal environment as well. So the external environment is outside the control of the firm. The firm doesn't have control over it. And for example, it's things like the cost of labor. So as you know, we have a legislated minimum wage for many sectors in South Africa. If you happen to be in one of those sectors like retail or farming or anything like that, you are mandated to follow the government gazetted cost of labor. So that's outside your control. Another area that's outside the control of firms is the rand-dollar exchange rate. So if, for example, you are a company like MultiChoice and you buy a lot of content from HBO or international providers of this content, the rand-dollar exchange rate is outside your control, and the rand may weaken, and you would have to pay more for that content. Another factor in the external environment, which firms have had absolutely no control over and have all been forced to manage in different ways, is the arrival of the pandemic. So this has been a factor in the external environment which affects all businesses from hospitality to transport to education, etc. And again, out of the control of the firm, yet the firm has to find a way to manage it. So how do you manage the external environment, or how do you approach trying to manage it. You can scan for problems, you can monitor, you can forecast. We think this is what's going to happen. For example, with the rand dollar exchange rate, um, a lot of firms forecast what they think the rand dollar exchange rate will be, and that how that will affect the cost of their inputs, and then continue to assess the environment. And with regards to COVID-19 pandemic, all firms are continuously scanning, monitoring, forecasting, and assessing what's happening. How is the pandemic affecting their business? Do we think there will be a third wave? What is the likelihood? How will that impact business, etc.? Okay, so then a particular tool we can use to assess the external or macro environment and the effect of the macro environment on a business is the PESTEL analysis. And as you can see here, it stands for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. So what we will do in the live session is I will give you a particular scenario of a company or a business, and I will say to you, conduct a PESTEL analysis for this business. So what factors in the political environment, economic, social, etc., can impact? And what are these factors? So name the factors as well as what factors in these environments can affect the firm and how will they affect the firm. So please do come prepared. This will be very good practice for your F1 because you are required to do a PESTEL analysis. So as I said before, after you look at the external environment, the next level is the industry or market environment. So every firm forms part of a particular industry. And just as a firm considers the macro environment, they must consider the industry or market environment. Now, a firm has no control over the macro environment. It has some control over the decisions it makes, etc., and how it will play in the industry in which it is playing. Depending on whether your business is a large player or a major competitor, it may have a little bit more influence in the industry and more impact on the industry than if it was a smaller player. So what are we interested in with regards to the industry environment is how many competitors exist, what is the influence of these competitors, what is the influence of suppliers, what is the influence of buyers, and that sort of thing. Okay, so a model for industry analysis that's very well known is known as the Porter's Forces model. This was created by Michael Porter quite some time ago, but yet remains a very valuable tool for industry analysis. So if we look at this diagram, we see that these tenets, what is the threat of new entrants? So is it an industry where new entrants can easily enter? What is the power of buyers or consumers? Are consumers able to drive prices down? What is the threat of substitute? So is this industry's products easily substitutable? And what is the role of suppliers? Do suppliers have a great deal of power? Are they powerful suppliers? Are they able to, charge high prices? So all of these together have an impact on the competitive rivalry and the situation within this particular industry. So if you're going to start a new business or anything like that, or if you are an existing player in an industry, conducting a Porter's forces model analysis will help you to see what are the strongest forces in a particular industry. So for example, is it that consumers have a lot of choice? So there's lots of substitutes, and this gives them lots of power to drive down prices. So that means this industry is, highly competitive and consumers have a lot of power. You can also find industries where suppliers have a lot of power. So if you are in an industry where you rely on a few very powerful suppliers, So Eskom, when it comes to coal, relies on a few suppliers for coal. And these suppliers may be able to drive up prices if there are just a few and there's nowhere else they can get coal from. For example, in the market for something like soft drinks, there's a lot of soft drinks on the market. So buyers or consumers can, shift away from a product, lots of substitutes very easily as soon as a product's price rises. Threat of new entry. So here we look at, we talked about this in economics last year where, we talked about barriers to entry in a particular industry. In some industries, you don't need lots of capital, machinery, infrastructure, and lots of money to enter that industry. So it's easy for new competitors. In other cases like airlines and mobile telephone networks like MTN, Vodacom, Cell C, it's very difficult to enter the industry because in order to be the next Cell C or Vodacom, you need to have lots and lots of money, skills, capabilities to lay down all the infrastructure, to have networks, etc. So threat of new entry talks about how easy or how difficult it is for new competitors to enter that particular industry. So once again, we will be practicing an example of doing a Porter's five forces. This will be important. I think it is in the F2 where Porter's five forces, or you have to do a Porter's analysis. You're given an industry or you're given a scenario and you're asked to do research and to conduct an industry analysis. So during our live session, we will practice this as well. Okay, and then as always, we have videos for you to watch, but here we have an article. So this article is how Capitec overcame high barriers to entry in South Africa. So Capitec was a player that came after your traditional Standard Bank, Absa Bank, FNB, and Nedbank. And this article talks about what are the barriers to entry in the banking arena, and what were some of those barriers that Capitec had to overcome in order to enter banking and become, a big player. So there's an article for you to read, and we'll have a brief discussion on that. A video which explains pestle analysis, and then this one on Porters, they actually do a Porters analysis and they give real world examples. Okay, so what do we cover in this recording? We are entering chapter 3, two very important models, the pestle analysis and the Porter's model. So what are we doing? We are looking at the environment, or what is a firm? A firm is part of the macro environment, it's part of the industry or market environment, and it's also part of the internal. It has its own internal environment. So why do we look at the environments of a firm? This is a necessary action as part of prudent strategic management. So please do attend the live Zoom session where we will be practicing pestle analysis and we will be practicing the Porter's model. So that's all for now. Please make sure you watch the YouTube videos and you also look at the textbook and read the given article.